It is really crazy. A gluten sensitivity can mimic all of like Parkinson's and MS and all of these other things because the immune system goes through a process called molecular mimicry, and that gluten molecule looks very similar to the thyroid molecule and to the cerebellum of the brain. It's estimated that pretty much 100% of women who have Hashimoto's actually have a gluten sensitivity. Now, it's important to realize that a gluten sensitivity does not mean celiac. A gluten sensitivity does not mean that you have an anaphylactic reaction to gluten. What this means is that you have some kind of inflammatory process when you eat gluten and it triggers the immune system.
Welcome to the Brain Regen Lab podcast, where ancient healing meets modern science to transform the future of brain health. I'm Dr. Greg Eckel, and after 25 years in the trenches of integrative medicine, I'm here to challenge the status quo. On this show, we dive deep into the most advanced strategies in brain regeneration, cognitive longevity, and bioenergetics with some of the brightest minds in neuroscience, medicine, and performance. Whether you're fighting cognitive decline, optimizing your mental edge, or just curious about what's possible for the human brain and being, this podcast is your lab for discovery, healing, and human potential. So let's push the boundaries of what's possible, revitalize your mind, transform your life. Let's begin. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Dr. Greg Eckel here. Our title of the show, The Thyroid-Brain Connection, is going to be a good one. We've got Dr. Heather Stone. She's one of the top functional medicine practitioners in the world. She has over 20 years of clinical experience in private practice. And during that time, she has successfully helped thousands of women overcome the symptoms of hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Her thyroid transformation blueprint has been used by hundreds of doctors and thus has helped countless women return to happy, healthy, and lean. Her mission is to change the face of healthcare through her private practice, books, masterclasses, webinars, education programs, and retreats on her ranch in Texas. Welcome aboard, Doc.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. And as we were kind of just discussing to launch this, there are a ton of connections, but we really want to emphasize the thyroid-brain connection. And, a lot of our listeners are looking at brain issues, brain fog, fatigue, the whole way through Parkinson's or traumatic brain injuries, multiple sclerosis. And there is a ton of evidence in supporting, the thyroid regulation of the nervous system and the brain in particular. And I'd love to start there with you, and then we can get into the nuances of the thyroid.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's important to really understand that the thyroid hormones it's one of the most important hormones in the body. Not that there's one more important than the other because the body is an amazing machine that works on all of them together. But the thyroid is unique because it has receptor sites at every single cell in the body, including your brain. And it's really intended to regulate your metabolic rate. And regulating your metabolic rate is extremely important for your brain health because, as we know, the brain really loves to run on sugar and glucose metabolism. And, insulin plays a huge role in there, but your thyroid has a huge connection with your overall brain health.
That is receptors of the thyroid throughout the body, especially the brain. There's been published research of functional hypothyroidism mimicking Parkinsonism symptoms, and the aspects of the regulator of the thyroid. How do you unpack that for folks in relationship to the other hormones and, where, that through the lens of Dr. Heather, is the thyroid is the way in. And I love that because it is a master gland there for sure. How do you put that in perspective of it regulates the metabolism? So let's talk thyroid there.
So essentially, the thyroid makes mostly T4 hormone. And then the body has to convert that T4 hormone into T3 hormone, which is the active form of thyroid hormone that can actually bind at the receptor site and allow the body to regulate its metabolic rate. And I think it's important to really understand that when people are diagnosed with low thyroid or hypothyroid, where the thyroid is not making enough thyroid hormone, the number one cause is an underlying autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's. And it's important because the brain and your immune system and Hashimoto's and the thyroid are so interconnected. So people can have symptoms of like it can mimic Parkinson's. It can look like you have early onset Alzheimer's. It actually, when we have other things that are impacting the brain, actually causes the brain to start downsizing, like mold toxins and mycotoxins. So, this whole thing with autoimmunity and hypothyroid is a lot bigger and deeper than just this, here you have low thyroid, take these thyroid hormones and everything should be amazing. And I think if that was the case, we wouldn't have this, epidemic essentially of hypothyroid because women are taking their thyroid medication and still have all of these symptoms that are associated with low thyroid, like low energy. They can't lose weight. They have anxiety and depression. They have brain fog. They can't sleep at night. So, all of those are symptoms, which is interesting to, if you think about the thyroid and what we've kind of been talking about, the thyroid affects everything in the body. If you look at those symptoms, it's almost across the board, right? It's your weight, it's your brain, it's your moods, it's your other hormones. We're learning more and more about the connection between estrogens, progesterones, and testosterone and thyroid. And I think, unfortunately, that's still an area that is understudied. And we are just really starting to learn how all of these things are interconnected.
I came across a textbook in the 30s that had an amazing diagram, and that endocrine triangle is what I call it, the thyroid, adrenal gland, and then the sex hormones, those interrelationships. And it's interesting, right? Like those symptoms are so common. Like
Yeah.
you go through those, and that is like the metabolic issues that a majority of people are facing. Now, in conventional land, it's just hypothyroidism, low functioning thyroid. But you just said the majority of folks with this diagnosis actually have an autoimmune condition.
Yes, upwards of about 95%. Some research suggests 98% of women who've been diagnosed with low thyroid actually have Hashimoto's. And so that means that the immune system is tagging your thyroid tissue for destruction. And unfortunately, in traditional medicine, they assume that women have hypothyroid if they have low thyroid, but the treatment doesn't change. The treatment, even if you just have low thyroid versus Hashimoto's, is still just thyroid replacement hormone. They're not really looking to get down to the root cause of what's triggering the immune system to attack the body in the first place. And that's really where we are seeing the downfall or the gap with traditional medicine, is that they just put us on hormone replacement therapy, but never really fixing the underlying triggers, which is why we still have all of these symptoms even though we're taking thyroid hormones, or maybe even if you're testing your thyroid hormones in blood, they all look good, but you still have all of these symptoms. And I think it's important, like if you want to kind of take this back to physiology in the brain, most women are dealing with dysglycemia. And dysglycemia means that you have a dysregulation in your blood sugar. And what happens for a lot of women is that our detoxification pathways aren't working very well. We are not able to clear out free radicals. Our antioxidants have been tapped out because of all the toxins that we're dealing with. So, what happens is the cells, they take in glucose from the blood and they use this glucose to make energy or ATP. And then comes a free radical that we have to clear out. Now, if those free radicals start building up in the body, the cells send signals and say, hey, I got all this free radicals here. The aging process is going way too fast and I may die. So we need to create an insulin resistance situation so that we're not taking in so much glucose. And then it can signals over to the thyroid and says, "Hey, thyroid, we cannot clear out these free radicals. We have an insulin resistance thing here. I need you to underconvert." So then the body starts underconverting T4 to T3. And then you start to have issues when you have insulin resistance. As you know, the brain starts to one of the biggest impacts on our blood sugar is our brain health. And when we have insulin resistance, high glucose levels, high insulin levels, it's one of the fastest things that degenerates or depletes brain health.
It is, we're calling there's a subset of Alzheimer's as like diabesity of the brain, totally related. And so what are the causes? What are you seeing in your practice or in educating people about? Because those root causes they're kind of landmines everywhere for everyone.
Yes. So it's so important to get down to the root cause because everybody is different and everybody has their own root causes. Now, the typical root causes of why the immune system would actually attack the thyroid, we have to look at insulin surges and insulin resistance. Every time we have an insulin surge or a glucose surge, it can cause the immune system to attack the thyroid. We're looking at estrogen surges and testosterone surges. Those also can be a trigger. We are looking at food sensitivities. We are looking at gut health or underlying infections. Underlying infections are huge. I would say probably 70 to 80% of my patients, I find underlying infections that they never knew that they had. They never knew that their symptoms of fatigue could be an underlying infection, whether it's bacterial or viral or parasitic. There are so many underlying infections that we have because our immune system is out of balance. And then a really big, huge one is toxins. And we're talking about mold toxins or mycotoxins. Those very specifically start to downsize a part of the brain called the cingulate and the basal ganglia. And you will start to lose words in the middle of sentences. It'll be hard to focus and concentrate, hard to retain new information. And what's really crazy is I've just had this influx of women over the last year or so being diagnosed with ADHD. I'm like, you're just now being diagnosed with ADHD and they're sticking you on Adderall at 50 and 60 years old. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to check. And of course, they almost always have mycotoxins. And once you start to clear that out, I've had the privilege of doing volumetric brain MRIs before a patient gets started and then do it again after 9 months after they're done. And you actually see a significant increase in volume of the brain. So the brain is actually increasing in size and the symptoms are going away. But not just the mycotoxins. We're looking at heavy metal toxins, we're looking at environmental toxins. So all of these are kind of the big triggers that we are dealing with that cause autoimmunity. And then the other one is kind of like the elephant in the room is stress. And, when you start to lose your reserves to handle stress, it really starts to snowball in the body. And I think a lot of people, they have stress in the body internally, they have some stress outwardly. But what we don't realize is that the anticipation of stress actually causes the same hormones to be released in the body, even if that stress never happens. The
Mm.
things that we think about, if we think about the past or we're worried about the future, that literally creates a stressful environment in the body, and it will cause the exact same hormones to be released as if you are still in the stressful situation.
Wow. Just the thought of thinking it's going to be stressful. Yeah, our thoughts really truly matter. Awesome to know. So, what's the link with gluten sensitivity? Do you find a lot of that happening with the thyroid?
Yes. Thank you for asking that. So, I briefly mentioned food sensitivities just as in passing earlier, but gluten is really huge, especially for women who have Hashimoto's, especially for people who have autoimmunity. And it is really crazy. A gluten sensitivity can mimic all of like Parkinson's and MS and all of these other things because the immune system goes through a process or it has a process called molecular mimicry, and that gluten molecule looks very similar to the thyroid molecule and to the cerebellum of the brain. It's estimated that pretty much 100% of women who have Hashimoto's actually have a gluten sensitivity. Now, it's important to realize that a gluten sensitivity does not mean celiac. A gluten sensitivity does not mean that you have an anaphylactic reaction to gluten. What this means is that you have some kind of inflammatory process when you eat gluten and it triggers the immune system. So many women think, well, if I eat gluten, I don't get a stomach ache, so I don't have a problem with gluten. But what happens is if we get gluten out of the body, we calm down the immune system and brain fog starts to clear up and your energy starts to go up and inflammation starts to go down and you start to release weight. But you have to remember that these gluten antibodies stay circulating in your system for up to 90 days or longer. So some patients say, "Oh, Dr. Heather, I tried going gluten free and that didn't work for me." I'm like, "Okay, what did that mean to you?" So they'll
Mm.
say, "Well, I did it for 3 weeks or I did it for 30 days and nothing really changed." But they still had those gluten antibodies still circulating in the system. Or maybe they're gluten free 6 days of the week, but not 7 days. I made that mistake early on, like 22 years ago when I went gluten free, although I didn't really know I was going gluten free. I just went grain free. But on Sundays, I would kinda cheat and do whatever I wanted to. I started feeling better, but I wasn't like, completely better, and now I know why, the more that you know. So those antibodies stay circulating for up to 90 days.
Mm.
And remember, the molecule is very similar to the cerebellum. And also, women have what would be called TPO antibodies. That's how you diagnose Hashimoto's, at least one of them. Those 3 molecules look very similar, and so when women have TPO antibodies positive and they eat gluten, it will cause the immune system to attack the cerebellum, so they'll have dizziness issues, issues with balance, issues with being steady, coordination of thought as well, we now know the cerebellum helps with. So gluten is huge, and I would say if anybody was to try anything, going gluten-free for at least 90 days would be probably a it would make a huge difference in the inflammatory processes. But I also will say, eating all of those what is now available gluten-free products with loads of sugar and loads of grain is probably not the best way to go gluten-free. But more whole foods like animal proteins and vegetables and, a little bit of fruit and some good healthy fat, that's really how you wanna do gluten-free. Not to switch your cookies and your cakes and your candies for gluten-free cookies, cakes, and candies, 'cause that yes, you're gonna get the inflammation from gluten down, but you're just gonna create a whole load of inflammation from blood sugar issues.
Hey, it's Dr. Eckel here, just taking a quick moment to say thanks for tuning in to the Brain Regen Lab podcast. If you're enjoying this conversation and want to stay ahead of the latest in brain health, biohacking, and longevity, make sure to subscribe at brainregen.com/podcast. Not only will you never miss an episode, but you'll also get exclusive insights and tools to help you optimize your mind and body. I appreciate you being on this journey with me. Now, let's dive back in and keep unlocking the full potential of your brain and body. It's so true. I mean, you see so many people say, "Well, I'm gluten free," I'm eating all this gluten free food. And I'm like, that is not healthy. Potato starches, all the other flours, etc. It still have the sugar issues, the glucose spiking, insulin spikes, just like you were talking about earlier. So, in general, what have you found that I guess that would be one of the basics for people as far as like most important health practices to overcome the low thyroid and Hashimoto's in particular?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's some key basics, right? We need to make sure that we are regulating our blood sugar. The way that you do that is you eat whole foods, you get proteins, you have to eat animal protein, lots of veggies, a little fruit, good healthy fat. That's kind of like the foundation. Now, when I take patients on, we will customize based on how a person's responding, what their blood sugar is doing. We use a continuous glucose monitor so that we can see what are their individual sensitivities. So there's some customization that can and should happen, but in general, that's how you should eat. then you really need to pay attention to your sleeping because we need at least 8 hours of sleep a night. I just read a study that said that women actually need more sleep than men. 8 to 10 hours is where women really thrive. But you really should focus on sleep hygiene, making sure you are turning off all blue light 2 hours before bed. You want to make sure your room is pitch black. Sleeping temperature would be good at 68 degrees. And just making sure that your environment is conducive to actually sleeping. The other thing that's important is to get out in the sunlight first thing in the morning. Get your eyes looking towards the sun. That produces serotonin. And then at nighttime, when the light is blocked, that's what starts to produce melatonin. And so, really working with those sleeping habits is going to be really important. And then the other thing is to get movement, right? We have to move our bodies. Moving our bodies moves our lymph. It helps us with, clearing out toxins in the body. It also helps with cardiovascular and blood sugar. So if you could do some resistance training and about, 5 to 10,000 steps a day, you would be really making huge headway. And then the last thing is to think about or notice what you're thinking about. Are you worried about the past? Are you worried about the future? Do you think of every terrible thing that could happen that never happens, but yet you're worried about it? So those are kind of like the four, pillars that we could start installing in our life tomorrow that would make huge changes.
Let's talk about that, the thought pattern. How do you train or teach people to tune into that? Because it is that is the least tapped vein that I'm seeing for people, that we haven't really been taught how to do that, like how the apparatus runs. And we're not even like in our bodies a lot of the time. So how do you help people get there?
This is what I always say to patients. It's like, this is probably 80% of what really moves the needle, and we're all focused on the 20%. And the 20%, as a practitioner, we can pretty easily change, right? We can easily tell the patient, you need to take this supplement, you need to eat this way. We are all focused over here. The biggest frustration is the 80% that I can't really move the needle for the patient. However, the patient has to start to notice what it is that they're thinking about. And one of the things that I have patients do is I have them start to think about, what kind of life are you trying to create? What is it that maybe retirement life looks like? What is it that, how do you want to live the next 10, 15, 20 years of your life? And I make them write it down. We get extremely detailed. I get them to think about what it feels like, what it looks like, what it smells like, what the colors are, how they feel in their clothes and their jeans, and how their energy feels. So we get really granular. And then I have them close their eyes and create the movie, right? How does it play in their mind? You know what the best way to fall asleep is? When you wake up in the middle of the night and your brain starts going and it's like you can't shut it off and then you can't go back to sleep. Well, I have my patients just play the movie in their mind about their future. And they go to sleep within seconds. And then whenever they start to worry, this causes you to be more aware of the thoughts that you're thinking. But when you start to worry or you start to have negative thoughts, if you'll just play the movie in your mind, it'll really pull you right into the present moment and get you out of that worry. And the other thing to really think about, is your worrying going to help the situation? Is there something that you can change right now that you can do to help change the situation? Then you need to do it. If it's out of your control, then you've got to just give it to God, right? You've just got to let it go and start to think about what kind of future that you're creating. And it gives you a tool to kind of snap out of that and start to dream and create again. Because when people are sick, when people have a lot of underlying imbalances and they're not doing well, their creativity and their dreaming, it completely gets shut down because the body is only using its resources that it has for survival. And so if you start to work out of that, then everything starts to gain momentum forward.
Oh, so beautiful. Thank you for that. That's wonderful. I love that, the future movie, it is true. It's such a truism that energy flows where your attention goes.
Yeah.
So are you creating, are you on the things? It's like we have to be spiritual warriors with our thoughts, our
Yeah.
minds, like corralling this thing. It really can work for us, but most of us it's been programmed to work against us.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because we don't know that it's working. It's always working for us, right? Whether we're trying to survive or we're trying to thrive, but we don't really know how it's working. So if we don't know how it's working, right? Your subconscious mind is what we're really talking about, and it lives by three rules: to keep you safe, to keep you alive, and to keep you away from pain. And it's like a robot. It doesn't have the ability to reason through things. I was talking to my son the other day. He's a baseball player, and we were talking about he's kind of struggling with his hitting. And I just asked him, I said, "So tell me what you're thinking about." Because I've taught him how to meditate, and he has some meditations that he does before he plays. And he said something negative, and I said, your subconscious mind is really taking that exactly how you're saying it, literal. He goes, "You're telling me that my subconscious mind can't know that I'm joking about it?" I'm like, "I'm telling you that it doesn't know that it's a joke and that it is taking you literal. So you need to change what comes out of your mouth, because everything that we say and everything that we think is programming the subconscious mind. And it's always trying to keep us safe, away from pain, and to keep us alive." And so, if you know that it's going by those rules and it doesn't really interpret or reason through the things that you're saying, then it's always working with you. So, you
Mm.
just have to know that so that you can say, "Oh, so instead of us, a lot of women dealing with thyroid, most of us have weight issues. So, instead of us thinking and feeling and saying that I'm fat or saying that nothing's ever going to change because I'm postmenopausal, like those things come out of our mouth all the time, and you're literally just keeping to program your subconscious mind. But if you will instead think about your future, think about what you're trying to create, you literally reprogram your subconscious mind.
I love it. I love it. It's such a big thing for folks because there is so much negativity and it's crazy out there when you get on the news waves or you hear about what's happening in the world. And so our focus mine as a provider too is really reflecting back, having people understand that answer lies within you. We need to be aware, wake up to what is the story we're telling ourselves, our innate intelligence, and then remove obstacles to cure. Like you had mentioned, the four pillars of just starting with on foundational components of living to be an actualized human being. So it's so exciting. I really love what you're doing, Dr. Heather. Any last parting words that you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers here with your message on the thyroid brain connection or thyroid health in general?
Yeah, I think it's really important that you realize the study of epigenetics says that we have a set of genes that we can manipulate the expression, right? They turn on and they turn off based on the environment that they're exposed to. And there's two environments that you need to be aware of. There is the chemical environment, the food we eat, the supplements we take, the toxins we're exposed to, but then there's also the emotional environment. We are vibrational, energetic beings. And so the thoughts that we think and the information that we consume, that's also creating the environment that is turning your genes on or turning your genes off. So we have to weigh each of those things equally. So I know that most people love taking supplements. They love trying the next fad diet, and they love, trying the next exercise thing. But I think if you also focused on the thoughts that you think and the words that you say, you're gonna make just as big of an impact.
Oh, all right. Everybody, if you got something out of today's message, give us a thumbs up, a like, put a comment under this show and let people know. Let me know. I want to get this conversation going with you all. We wouldn't be doing it without you. Also, if you were just really into the show, give us a 5-star review and tell people what you're taking out of this and what are you going to put into action, because that's what it's about. It's about the transformation, this information coming from us, our hearts, to you on the interweb. So until next time, everybody, thank you, Dr. Heather Stone. We're going to put all of your information in the show notes on how to connect, and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
If you're finding this conversation insightful, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's a simple way to stay connected and get more strategies for optimizing brain function and longevity. Plus, it helps us bring you even more cutting-edge content. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get back to exploring the future of brain health. Thanks for joining us this week on the Brain Regen Lab podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to visit brainregen.com, where you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's conversation, we'd love for you to leave a review. It helps others discover the show. You can also share this episode with a friend or loved one who's passionate about brain health. Want to dive deeper? Check out our latest resources at brainregen.com/podcast. Be sure to tune in next week as we continue unlocking the secrets to a sharper mind and a longer, healthier life. Stay sharp, stay curious, and keep thriving.